Hi, everyone. Welcome to another exciting edition of Words, Images, and Worlds. On this episode, I am delighted to be talking with, I'll say comics creator, but this is a person who has had a hand in a variety of ways of creating, as I'm sure we'll explore, and that is uh, Jan Scherpenhuizen. Jan, thank you for
Perfect.
jumping
Perfect.
in.
Difficult name, folks. Jason, you're a pro.
We try. We try. Thank you so much. Yeah. Yeah. Much appreciated. Thank you for the time. And I believe I came across your work because I interviewed one Mr. Christopher Sequeira about a month or two ago, and he mentioned you. And so I immediately got in touch. So thank you for following up on that and being willing to come aboard and speak with me for a bit.
Always a pleasure to speak to somebody who has a shared passion. So and connect with people around the world, and obviously, hopefully, a few more people will become aware of what we're doing, and yeah, get on board. That would be nice.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And you and I have, I think, a variety of shared passions from the conversation we were having before I hit record. And so we're both educators, both have interesting comics, of course, both have interesting critical thinking, theology. So it seems we have much in common, much in
Yeah,
common.
absolutely.
Yeah. I am curious by means of a first question and an introduction to your work. I know that you are currently engaged with something called The Human Fly, and I also know that in addition to comics, you've worked in children's literature, animation, a variety of worlds and works, and you also shared something with me called The Time of Wolves that we'll be sure to mention. So curious about how you connected with this world of creating and storytelling. And it seems like all of what you do includes visuals in one way or another.
Uh, yeah, actually, I write a lot of just pure prose fiction. In fact, I've written like 5 or 6 novels and 3 or 4 volumes of short stories and children's books and things like that.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, most of those are, I mean, IFWG, who Chris is an editor for them, they've published 3 or 4 of my stories.
Hmm.
I've had
Hmm.
a few other stories published in anthologies elsewhere. But yes, the novels I haven't been able to place, and I'm always moving on from it. I tend to finish things and throw them in the back drawer and start on something else, which is not a good habit. But I'm very good at the creative stage, and I'm passionate about the creative stage. I hate the selling stage. Uh,
Hmm.
so yeah, that's why things like like at the moment. Uh, I have a publisher for the Human Fly, or that they talked to me about doing it. They had the property, so that's how I got to do that. But I mean, to start off with, I've always loved stories. I guess I sort of fell in love with Astro Boy and Quick Draw McGraw and various other black and white cartoons at that stage. And then I saw my first comic books. We had show bags, as what they were called in Australia. So there was like a big agricultural fair, which was a big event of the year, and then people would give away bags full of goodies, samples. Nowadays you pay for them, but in those days they were free, and they had these fat comics like this, which later on I realised were returns, which had been
Hmm.
stuck together to make jumbo, and they were like 100, 300 pages long, and they were all black and white reprints of DC comics. And so that
Oh,
was the Bob Kane, Batman, the Wayne Boring, Superman, and Jack Sprang's work was always in there. World's Finest, I loved that. Doom Patrol, I adored. Things like Adam Stramming, really primo classic 1960s stuff. And that was like, oh my God, this is just amazing, fabulous. I've got to be involved in that. So, you know, and I was always drawing, always copying stuff, yeah, Top Hat, draw the characters, the cats, the top cat. I mean, sorry,
hmm.
top
Hmm.
cat. All on lined paper. Any scrap of paper I could find, I'd be drawing with textures and crayons and pencils and things like that. But a huge turning point for me was I was sitting in a barber shop in a little country town where my grandparents had taken me to have my hair cut. And while I was in the barber shop, I picked up a copy of Thor 127, which was sitting on a desk, which was where Thor fights, I think, is it Sigurd or someone like that? Anyway, this bad guy who Odin has given him his power so that he can take away half of Thor's power because he doesn't have the heart to do it himself. Bit naff, really, but when you're a kid, you don't sort of see through. All wise Odin is giving his power to a very untrustworthy fellow who, of course, decides, well, now I have this power, I'm not giving it back. And then Thor has to fight this guy with Odin's power, with half his own power. And in the meantime, the Odin sword is starting to leave its sheath, and the end of the world is nigh. And Jack Kirby's artwork, it was like, I love Bob Kane, I loved all those guys, Bruno Premiani, Doom Patrol, magnificent work. But and of course, everybody understands that's why Jack Kirby was who Jack Kirby was, because nobody could see his work and go, I don't want a bit of that in what I'm going to do. So, I mean, a lot of people sort of, I think, complained in those days that when they went to Marvel, they had to Kirby up their work. But I don't think anybody's work suffered for it. I mean, there are a few people like Ditko and Wally Wood who were just so wonderful with what they did anyway that they really didn't need to change for anyone. But I mean, people like Gil Kane. I mean, Gil Kane, if you look at his work before he went to Marvel, it was beautiful work in a certain vein, but it certainly gained something when he but there were some guys I think who actually out Kirby when it came to the dynamics of what they did. Kirby is an undoubted genius, and he has this whole range of things that he brings. But I think Gene Colan, John Buscema, and maybe Gil Kane in his own way, they could bring this extra level of kinetic energy to what they did. And my next revelation, I'm sorry, I'm just going to rave
You're good.
forever.
You're good.
You've got me onto this. Was John Buscema seeing the cover of there's an issue where I think Quicksilver and Cyclops are fighting, and Quicksilver's coming up and he's throwing this punch, and I can see it in my mind's eye, and the beauty of Buscema's figure drawing combined with that Kirby-esque visceral dynamic quality, it was just mind-blowing. And I was looking through it and I'm going, oh, I think I like this more than Kirby. And it felt like a betrayal, it felt like it, but because Kirby was practically a deity in my youthful mind. And I mean, we're talking, I was maybe 10, 11. So yeah, and then then I sort of went more down the John Buscema way, because and nobody can really draw like Kirby. I mean, if you really try to draw like Kirby, then like Rich Buckley had a go, and Keith Giffen had a go, and I mean, great work. They're terrific artists, but it was still not. It was a bit like still second-rate Kirby. Like nobody could really do Kirby like Kirby. Mind you, I mean, it's not like I think I can do John Buscema like John Buscema, or but and I think he's if you look at the overall trajectory of comics, I think Kirby is everywhere because Kirby's in Buscema, but the approach to figure drawing and things like that, I think Buscema in the end has probably been even more influential. So that's sort of and I was totally focused on art, and I used to draw everything. I do still lifes and animals and everything, but I really wanted to be a comic book artist. But Australia didn't have a local comic book scene.
Hmm.
Marvel basically had come in, and prior to the 60s had been a certain amount of protectionism, and the local market was able to flourish. But once it was an open market, we couldn't compete with the slickness of the American product.
Hmm.
We didn't have the population to support it, etc. So the local scene died, and without a local scene, it became very hard for people to make a living out of comics. So, but that didn't stop us from trying. And like a lot of people, I have all my came that close stories and moments.
Hmm.
But
Hmm.
yeah, I never cracked the American scene. The closest I got was I mean, my work is in the Wolverine comic, for instance. That was a
Hmm.
48-page special written by Doug Munch and illustrated by an Australian guy, Michael Dukavich, who had cracked the American market and did. I don't know if you're familiar with Michael's work. He did
Hmm.
a Batman uh, movie adaptation. I think that's probably his best known work. He'd worked on Batman, he'd worked on Superman. So he'd really worked himself up to the top of DC. All of his work was DC. And then he finally got a gig from Marvel. And I'd met him at a convention because I'm very much a recluse. I don't go out, which also makes it difficult um, to connect with people. And networking is super important. Anyway, finally, I kicked myself out of my room and went to a convention, and I met Michael there, and I gave my portfolio, and a lot of people actually at that time gave me very positive feedback on my work. I was just saying, look, it's professional. You just got to get yourself in front of editors.
Hmm.
Anyway, Michael rang me up and said, "Oh, I've got this Wolverine gig," and he didn't tell me he'd just broken several assistants. He didn't put it like that, but he needed an assistant,
Hmm.
and I went to Adelaide, where Michael lives, and he had a big house, and so he put me up there very kindly, and we worked together for 4 or 5 weeks on this 48-page special. And this is the way comics works, for those that are interested. So it was myself, a guy called David Williams, who'd worked for Barossa Studios,
Hmm.
Glenn Lumsden. Uh, They'd done things like The Phantom. They also did a big Batman thing, which has never seen the light of day. And a guy called Tak Chung. So there were four of us. And Michael had broken several assistants in the previous couple of days. Guys that had turned up, and after 3 or 4 hours had been told that they couldn't get anything right, and just left in tears. Basically, I think um, if you want to get the Michael's version of the story, you'll have to talk to him. But that's roughly what I remember being told.
Hmm.
So, and he was a very hard taskmaster, I've got to say. But his reputation was on the line. It couldn't look there couldn't be anything on the page which he wasn't ready to take. Uh, well, as it is, he took credit for it. That wasn't his intention. We all were supposed to get credits along with him, but the editor didn't put it in, so that's an uncredited work. But that's in my PPT that I created. So you'll see my pencils, which are done over. Some of them were just Michael would give me some stick figures and say. And I did a lot of background, so there's a huge double-page spread which I did, which has got Angkor Wat and Borobudur
Oh,
in the same
nice.
place, and dozens of little figures fighting down below. So basically, that's all my work. And then there's another scene where I had to draw a bunch of ninjas fighting each other and leaping through the air and stuff like that. And that was nice. I brought it to Michael trembling because I'd done it by myself. And he said, "Ah, wonderful," because he's got one of those Adelaide accents. They sound like they're English down in Adelaide. "Oh, wonderful. I couldn't have done better myself," And uh, mind you, he did say, "Oh, it looks like Jeff Darrow," because I'd done it like very outlining. And while did give me that praise, it didn't have the blacks in it, which is the way he worked. So he got his pencil. Oh, just add this here, because he was very fast professional, and he sort of made it look more consistent with the rest of it. But yeah, I've got some pictures of that you can put on the screen. So that was exciting to work on that Wolverine book. But and at the end of the project, Michael was like, "Oh, this is fantastic! I've started getting work from Marvel now, and I want you to be my partner, and we'll do it together." And I'm like, "Oh yeah, I'm there." And I was like, oh, "Yes, this is one of my this close." Yeah. And so
Hmm.
as well as background, so I did secondary figures. He drew every single picture of Wolverine in the entire book, except I think David Williams managed to sneak one in, and I snuck one in as well. But he shortened the leg on it. He said, "Oh, that's too long." Well, good enough. And we always try to sneak our drawings in there. And I think it was because of deadlines we managed to get those two. But everything that was Wolverine in that book is drawn by Michael. But a lot of a lot of the ninjas and people like that, they're drawn by me. David drew some. Tack just did all the like we draw the ninjas, and then Mike with empty hands, and then Tack would come along and draw the guns in, and the aeroplanes and all kind. So it was very production line.
Very
So, but yeah,
collaborative.
no,
Yeah.
I thought I was away then, but I think that was like late 80s, and suddenly it was almost like the day we finished the job,
Hmm.
the market imploded. I think it was. You remember when they were printing all those variant covers and everything, and
Oh,
basically
yes.
everything fell in the toilet.
Hmm.
Basically, that's what happened, and that was the last job Michael did for
Ah.
anybody in the next thing he did was he'd done for innovation a book called Lost in Space: Journey to the Center of the Soul, or something like that,
Hmm.
uh, for this company called Innovation, and they'd gone under after maybe I think it was halfway through the arc, and Bill Mooney, who was the Will Robinson, he was
Hmm.
actually the writer, and it was either John Severin or John Severin's son or somebody had this company called Bubblehead, and they wanted to finish the book. So again, Michael called me up and said, "Oh, I'm going to be finishing this, and I remember how good you were to work with on Wolverine, so I'm going to get you on board." So again, it was drawing stuff from Michael. I think it was good enough. But anyway, we got to the end of that. And again, I was not the only assistant on that. There's another guy called Frey Micklethwaite, who's a fantastic artist. But again, he's not ever done anything that people would know. He's more gone into fine art. He does murals and things like that. But so
Hmm.
there's a lot of us that get involved peripherally. But I as they say, I'm a lifer, so I don't give in. So I've stuck in there, and I started working with Chris after a while, and that came about because I'd written a short story. So in my 20s, I became interested in writing fiction, and I got a short story published in a horror magazine,
Hmm.
a short-lived professional horror magazine called Blood Songs, which went for like 12 issues or something. And Chris uh, knew the editors, and they wanted him to write a comic strip. And so they said, "Well, do you want to illustrate it?" Because by that time I'd become friends with them, and they knew that I could draw. As in fact, um, my short story was accompanied by an illustration that I'd done. So that's how I started working with Chris, and we did a character called Mr. Blood, which was basically Chris's creation. I'm sort of co-creator of it, as artists generally are the first artists to draw something, but it was really Chris's idea. But yeah, it's very much got my stamp on it. I sort of own the character in that regard as well. And we did we started off doing 2 pages, and then we bumped up to 4, and then we did 7 because they loved it.
Hmm.
Um, and and Chris was fantastic to work with. I mean, Chris and I have worked together ever since, and I'm like, I want to draw my own strip. So I want to write my own strip. I want to be drawing for somebody, other guy. But when Chris came on board, it was like, wow, he's really good. And he would do he would could do it like a story in 2 pages, and I'm like, yeah, I'm a novelist, I need at least 100. So that was good to have someone that could do something in 2 or 4, and they were really good little twist stories. So that's how Chris and I started working together, and eventually, and Chris is the most driven, disciplined person I know. He just goes for, he's always, oh, I've been talking to this editor at Marvel, I've been talking to this editor at DC, and I've been talking to this editor at Boom. And, you know, every now and then someone bites,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
then he'll get another gig. Um, but we've also done various projects together, created a number of other characters. Anyway, eventually, because of Chris's various explorations, he wound up as a editor at IFWG,
Hmm. Hmm.
and then IFWG decided to open up a comic imprint, which is IPI, and IPI got the license for the Human Fly. And again, this is another one of those long stories because Chris had met the guys from the Human Fly, and because Chris always does the San Diego Comic Con, and
Hmm.
he'd met
Hmm.
these guys who have the license for the Human Fly, because it was a Marvel property briefly that I think Marvel licensed it for a couple of years. If anybody knows the Human Fly, most of the people that know the Human Fly would know him from um, those comics that Marvel printed.
Hmm. Hmm.
And you're always looking for some brand recognition. It helps. It's sort of cool to do a character that was once a Marvel character. And some of the Fly comics had Spider-Man in them and stuff like that. So anyway, um, we've got the rights for the Human Fly, and Chris asked me if I'd draw it because we're used to working together, and I'm reliable and fast. So we're doing the Human Fly, and I can't tell you a lot about it at the moment because I still don't
Yeah.
have my
Yeah.
first script. There's been a lot happening, so it's been a bit slow getting started. But we've done a cover and a poster,
Hmm.
and and I'm just still waiting to find out what that's all going to be about. So,
Yeah, yeah. Looking forward to it. Looking forward to seeing how it all comes together. And would you like to say some things about the Time of Wolves as well? Because that's something you shared with me.
yeah, so again, Chris really should have a percentage of everything that I own because yeah, and like I said, I have to be dragged along to these things. I'm very introverted, but Chris is very extroverted,
Hmm.
and so he had met the uh, this guy who wanted to publish comics in Australia. And this is a very rare occurrence. Like I said, there hasn't really been much of a industry here. There have been a few publishers who come and go, but people find it very difficult to make any money out of it. But this chap, Baden Kurgan, has a printing business, and Chris had met him, and Chris had pitched him something, which he decided he wanted as one of his first raft of comics. So at a convention that he was attending, Chris introduced us, and I had 3 or 4 things which were already in development, which I was very keen to do. And I showed them to him, and he said, "Look, it's nice work, but it's not really the kind of thing that I want to publish."
Hmm.
And I said, "Well, tell me, what do you want to publish?" And he told me the sort of thing, which was basically horror.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
and he's a fan of Stephen King, as I am. And I said, I know exactly the story. And I told him the synopsis of The Time of the Wolves. And there's a big story behind that because this Time of the Wolves was actually a novel that I'd written, I think, 10 years prior to that. And I had written it on a laptop. And I'd been running a little shop with my then wife. And we got burgled one night, and
Uh,
somebody stole my laptop, and it had my completed novel on it. There was
oh,
no printed copy, so I didn't have the heart to start writing it again. So I'd been in that, but I always thought it was a great story. And the
mhm,
basic plot line is, and it came about because I've been reading Stephen King's The Stand, and I just loved the book. I was so sorry when it finished, but as a writer, you're always getting ideas from things. And I thought, oh, what would have been happening in Australia during that plague? And I wrote half a dozen short stories because I'd already had my first short story published by Blood Songs. And I was putting together an anthology, and I started writing those plague stories. And then I got this one idea, and I thought, oh, that's gold. That deserves to be a novel. And the story, the idea is that there's an FBI agent who's
mhm,
set in Australia. But anyway, this is the new iteration which I created for Baden, because Baden didn't want something set in Australia, and I was happy to set it in America. So the Americanized version is, as an FBI agent, he's chasing a serial killer who exsanguinates his victims, and thereby is dubbed by the very imaginative press Dracula.
mhm,
And
mhm.
he finally catches him, but he catches him just at the moment when this big plague, a la The Stand, uh, peaks and wipes out the vast majority of human beings. And in the ensuing chaos, the guy gets away from him, and he knows that. So the serial killer and he are amongst the very small percentage. I mean, it's like maybe 0.5% of the human race has survived. So amongst this small percentage is himself and the serial killer. The serial killer's out there preying on the traumatized survivors, and although he's lost his family and just about everybody else he knows, he figures it's up to him still to stop this guy, because the people that remain deserve to be protected. He hasn't lost his basic raison d'etre, which is to protect people. That's why he is who he is. Um, and then there's various plot lines. There's also these H.P. Lovecraft type
Yes.
creatures coming out of the ground and stuff like that, and other characters that dovetail into the storyline. So yeah, it was a bit of a that was 2008. I started that. It took a couple of years. Um, and then my life took a very unfortunate turn. We had a personal tragedy in the family, which sort of derailed me for several years. And then, but yeah, I basically, and Chris was a fantastic friend to me during that time. He was one of the people that sort of kept me going, and he was always, encouraging me to keep involved in work. So we did various pictures, we did various comics. We created a character called the Catamorph, who appeared in one issue of um, Black House Comics, Baden Kurgan's company. So he printed the first story arc of it was called, the comic was called The Twilight Age. My initial novel's title was The Time of the Wolves, though, and I really didn't like The Twilight Age, and particularly because, again, after it came out, suddenly this movie Twilight was super
Yes.
uh, popular, and I would have people come out to me at conventions where I was selling my comic and going, that's that Twilight thing that you've ripped that off. And I'm like, no, it's a coincidence, one I regret, but it was too late. So I was really happy to get rid of the title, The Twilight Age. So I like it. Was sort of like the Twilight Zone. I mean, nobody said that Twilight was ripping off the Twilight Zone. That was more
True.
my inspiration than anything else. Um, yeah, and then so Black House Comics decided to do this black and white magazine, which was going to be distributed on newsstands, called Terror. And the first episode of The Cat, which was going to be 3 10-page installments, came out, and then Black House shut its doors. So that's something that I think will see the light of day eventually. But a lot of these a lot of these projects have long periods of gestation.
So, anywhere that people can go to follow along and find the works.
Yeah, I've got a couple of websites. Jan Scherpenhuizen Illustrator has got my uh, stuff on it. I'm actually going to be writing a blog, but probably IPI and IFWG are going to be publishing most of my stuff for the next little bit. But you can find the Time of the Wolves is actually available through Amazon.
Nice, nice.
So if anybody wants to get the regular version, they can get that through Amazon. And otherwise, I'm going to be there was a limited edition, um, but I haven't got around to promoting it properly. But I've been promising myself to do a Kickstarter, so I'm doing a Kickstarter with which has is a limited edition. It has pinups by various Australian luminaries. It has um, a very nice introduction by Jason Franks, who's one of my
Nice.
favourite writers and favourite fellow collaborators.
Hmm, hmm.
But you can, yeah, there's a fair bit of my stuff on Amazon as well. If you want to find my fiction, some of my novels there. And yeah, there's also stuff of mine in various IFWG anthologies. Yeah, so that's where you can find more of my stuff. And
Fantastic.
in Australia, I'm a frequent guest at comic book conventions, so people come along to comic book conventions. That I'm hoping to get over to San Diego sometime, and maybe Toronto, because apparently the Human Fly is a Canadian of Canadian origin. So they're going to be doing a launch in Toronto this year, I think, but I don't know if I'll get to the next one. But in the future, I hope to visit your fine country and get along to some conventions.
Wonderful, wonderful. That would be great, and looking forward to seeing how the human fly shapes up. I know you can't say too much about it right now, but also glad to have you back anytime to talk about it as it comes into the next steps, and to
Well,
talk
I
about
think
any other
it
projects
might
too.
be nice if we do a thing with Chris and I talking about the human fly. And there's actually a few guys as the Canadian owners,
Hmm.
Tony Babinski, I think is one of them. I'm sorry, the other guy's name escapes me for the moment. My short-term memory is really bad at the moment. Um, but yeah. So yeah, it might be quite nice for us to have a bit of a group session when we have an issue to discuss.
Yeah, yeah, and I think I'm talking with Tony in a few days.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah. So would be glad to have you back and Christopher and Tony, and we could do a sort of a group chat Zoom multiple window episode.
That would be awesome. And actually, one of the projects that Chris and I are involved in is called Super Australians. So the first raft of IPI comics, which are going to be released this year, 2024 now,
Hmm, hmm.
includes the Super Australians, which I've been doing the covers for, and also a number of interior chapters, and the final issue is all the arts by me. So maybe Chris and I could come on and talk to you about Super Australians.
Absolutely, anytime, anytime. I will do the time zone math as best I can, and we will find a time. It sounds great.
It's been a great pleasure. I'm sorry I didn't leave much space for anybody else to talk, but
No, no,
so,
you are fine. You are fine. I'm the only other person that would have talked, and I am, yeah, I am fine. This is a great conversation. So glad to hear about the creative path, and glad to hear about the journey so far, and may it continue.
all right. Thanks, Jason. It's been a great pleasure.